What happens when you hear a siren? When I hear a siren, I feel it in my body. My chest feels tight. My heart starts racing. I feel on edge. Both my understanding and experience of the way Black people and our communities are policed has made an imprint on my brain. What happens to me when I hear a siren is not just a bodily response. It's a psychological response, a stress response, and I'm not the only one. The encounters you have had or haven't had with the police will shape what happens to you when you hear a siren, or if you even hear it at all. Not only do we live in a society where some communities hear sirens a lot more than others, we live in a society where hearing a siren can mean relief, protection, and safety for some, yet fear, danger, and pain for others. That's the tension for me. This should make me feel safe. So why do I feel fear? I'll ask again, what happens when you hear a siren? And have you ever thought about what happens to others? Once again, the detrimental impact of policing on Black people came to the fore of public consciousness last summer. The police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis reinvigorated a global movement for accountability and racial justice. Across the world, millions of people took to the streets to stand against violence and show solidarity to the bereaved families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many more. Too many more. All in the midst of a global health pandemic. And the UK was no different. Hundreds of thousands of us protested across the nation. I was one of them. Across Europe, millions of people got down on one knee to physically embody their outrage that the police had choked yet another Black man to death in a place that they probably wouldn't be able to point to on a map. Why? Because international solidarity is fundamental, because from America to France to Brazil to Canada to the UK, Black people are over-policed and under-protected. We experience a police force and not a police service, which often results in our untimely and violent deaths. But who were you marching for? Because my observation was this: the European Parliament could pass its own resolution denouncing police brutality in America for the very same reason that the National Council of Police Chiefs in the UK could issue its very own statement claiming to be in solidarity with the family of George Floyd. Because it's far easier to point the finger abroad than to dismantle the systems of structural racism and violence on our very own doorstep. We have a culture of deflection and unaccountability, but I want to bring it home and amplify the message of those of us who were clear in our outrage. The UK is not innocent. Rashawn Charles couldn't breathe when he was heavily restrained by a police officer and then died on the floor of a corner shop in Hackney in 2017. His death was ruled accidental. The CCTV footage did not secure justice for that family. Azelle Rodney was shot 6 times by police marksman Anthony Long in my very own community in 2005. His own bosses even joked that he was the Metropolitan Police's very own serial killer. But he was found not guilty of Azelle's murder in 2015. The last things Christopher Alder heard as he was laying, dying, face down on the floor of a police custody suite in Hull in 1998 was monkey chants and laughter. The Crown Prosecution Service claimed it could not infer a racist motivation. 5 officers were cleared of manslaughter. Trevor Smith, Darren Cumberbatch, Edson DaCosta, Nuno Cardoso, Mazee Mohammed, Dalian Atkinson, Sheku Bayo, Jermaine Baker, Adrian McDonald, Leon Briggs, Mark Duggan, Smiley Culture, Kingsley Burrell, Olaseni Lewis, Sean Rigg, Mikey Powell, Derek Bennett, Roger Sylvester, Brian Douglas, Mahmoud Hassan. This is not just an American problem. The deaths are the very tip of the iceberg. The culture of violence that enables them to happen at the scale that they do has many more victims, and most of them survive. Every experience of policing leaves a trace. Every "you fit the description," every stop and search, every video of police violence from across the world, every blue light, every siren, every single experience leaves a trace. But this is not just about policing. I have spent the last decade working with children and young people impacted by the criminal justice system, and I can tell you firsthand, it is completely broken. I have spent hours in police stations. I have spent hours in courtrooms. I have spent hours in prisons, and I have spent hours in probation offices. I have witnessed firsthand the misery, trauma, and harm that these places inflict on individuals, whole families, and entire communities. The fundamental issue is this: the only system we have to deal with conflict and harm is in and of itself a source of conflict and harm. But this is not just about the criminal justice system. This is about the structural racism which is woven into the very fabric of British society, and the ways in which every organization, institution, and system intertwine, resulting in interlocking experiences of oppression. The education system, the healthcare system, the welfare system, local authorities, schools, colleges, and universities, hospitals, mental health services, charities, and non-profit organizations, and how they all perpetuate racism and in some ways further the work of the criminal justice system. Police officers in schools, increase in school exclusions, local councils using police intelligence to threaten whole families with eviction, charities complicit in the process of criminalization in order to access funding. Collectively, they are all contributing to an increase in appetite for punishment. And this all has a detrimental and disproportionate impact on Black communities. So whilst many organizations claimed to be in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, how many really interrogated the ways in which they perpetuate racism? How many are really dismantling the racism and anti-Blackness which is embedded within their structures, processes, procedures, and practice? Black Lives Matter is not a slogan. It's a rallying cry for equity, equity which won't be achieved by posting a black square on Instagram, releasing a rushed public statement which lacks substance, or any of the other performative gestures we collectively witnessed. We need real action, because the cumulative impact for Black people who experience all of these systems at once is psychological harm. As Ghislaine Kinwani said, racism causes harm, harm to the body and harm to the mind. These simultaneous and layered experiences of racism result in racial trauma. There is no way to talk about racial justice or racial equity without talking about racial trauma. It isn't just a theory, it's what we're experiencing and living with every single day. Our mental health services have not even begun to understand its individual or intergenerational impact. So how can we even begin to heal when the very services that are supposed to facilitate healing often reproduce racism? We have had to create our own infrastructure at a community level to address racial trauma and deal with the harm. Not just the harm inflicted by the state, including state violence, not just the harm perpetuated by other organizations and institutions within society, but the harm that we cause each other and experience within our communities, which is a direct result of these societal pressures. Because the only system to deal with conflict and harm creates more conflict and harm, we have to reimagine what justice really looks like, what justice really feels like. And this is why I believe in transformative justice. It is so powerful because it fundamentally recognizes that we all have the capacity for transformation, the ability to change, that we can address violence in our communities, that we can seek safety and build accountability without relying on marginalization punishment, policing, or imprisonment. That we can heal from generational trauma and violence and transform the consequences of oppression on our hearts, our bodies, and our minds. That we must build collective power to respond to all forms of violence, including state and systemic violence. Transformative justice is not just a utopian idea, it's a practice. And like many grassroots organizations, the Forefront Project, which I set up in 2012 to empower young people, is practicing transformative justice and centering healing in our approach to address violence. Because working towards our individual and collective healing is one crucial way that we can resist a system which inflicts so much pain. For Forefront, practicing transformative justice is many things. It's de-escalating violence. It's conflict resolution, mediation. It's building capacity for community accountability processes. It's safety planning. It's supporting young people and their families to rebuild and strengthen their relationships. It's being present when they are in crisis. It's advocating for young people in the police station, in courts, and throughout legal processes to ensure their rights are upheld and their needs are met. It's supporting their families through these processes. It's holding institutions and organizations that are in their life accountable for the ways that they treat them. It's building their sense of self, their identity in a world that repeatedly tells them that their lives don't matter. It's building their skills and confidence to enable them to advocate for themselves, their families, our communities, as a means of resistance which is both liberatory and reparatory in and of itself. It's the love circle we had for a young man the day before he was potentially imprisoned, where our whole team, young people from our community and his friends, told him one by one all the reasons why they loved him, printed pictures, wrote him letters to take with him, so that if he was incarcerated, he would know that he was cared for, he mattered, and that he would still be supported. It's the memorial we had for a young man who was murdered in our community, where everyone had a chance to pay their respects, share memories, pay tribute, hold space for one another, and grieve together. It's a community support system which is not just in place when they have been harmed themselves, but also when they have harmed others. Not focused on perpetuating shame, but on providing compassion and opportunities to repair harm and move forward. It's building strong, long-term relationships with young people that center love, service, and care. It's actively fighting to dismantle racist systems, which we need to do by uplifting the voices and experiences of those most affected by them, whilst creating the space to heal from racial trauma, not only individually, but collectively. It's building hope and creating space to imagine and build new systems. Systems to deal with the harm and the violence. Systems for accountability and systems for healing. This kind of holistic support is what is transforming my community and our society. There is another way. If you believe Black Lives Matter, you have to support this fight in its entirety. Yes, we're talking about policing, but we're not just talking about policing, police killing people. We're talking about all of the impacts of policing. We're talking about the criminal justice system in its entirety and all of these other systems. You have to understand all of these systems. You have to understand racial trauma. You have to understand that even if you're not directly a part of these systems, that in some way you're still enabling them. And so in some way, you are still complicit. So really ask yourself, do I want this done in my name? What more can I do to fight for racial equity? Because I do not want to be protesting in 50 years with my grandchildren. You can actively support our resistance. You can actively support the building of these new systems. Coronavirus has not only highlighted the inescapable interconnectedness of humanity, but forced us to rethink the ways in which we live together. We have seen beautiful acts of mutual aid and care. Reimagining justice requires the same urgency, compassion, and commitment, and realizing how deeply connected we all are, another world is possible. So the next time you hear a siren, let that be your reminder of your responsibility to actively build that world.